There are a number of ways that we can examine human lifespan. For example, a biologist might look at cellular changes. Sociologists look at the role of culture in everything, even how kids play. When we look from the psychological perspective, we look at both of these things and more. Let's start with the basics. First, we know that both genetics and environment, sometimes referred to as nature and nurture, work together like a recipe to influence human development. Nature is what's inside the body, the genetic makeup we were born with. Nurture refers to influences outside the body, the culture in which we live. How much of each ingredient is at work, however, depends on the human characteristic we're considering. For instance, you might think that physical appearance is all the result of your DNA or nature. But don't environmental influences such as nutrition and exercise contribute to how you look? Nature is at work here too. Another important basic is understanding the relationship between different theoretical perspectives. A theory is an organized set of ideas, explanations, and sometimes predictions about a particular phenomenon. It provides a framework with which we can understand a set of facts that seem connected. All theoretical perspectives are valuable because each perspective is analyzing something different. The perspectives are not all in competition with each other. Look at this cake from this perspective. Now this one. Is it still a cake? Has it changed? No, only our perspective has changed. If we want to study the top of the cake, we look this way. But to see the size and layers, we look this way. Psychodynamic theories focus on early childhood experiences and the role of the unconscious mind in our behavior. Cognitive theories focus on the role of our mental processes, including things like intelligence, problem-solving, memory, and attention span. Sociocultural theories focus on what our experiences with others teach us, through culture and formal learning, and everyday living experiences. Throughout this course, you'll be introduced to many theories that fall into these categories. One of the most important basics to remember is that psychology is a science that relies on a variety of scientific techniques to test theories. The study of development is divided into three general areas: physical, cognitive, and social-emotional development. The study of physical development looks at some of the ways changes in the human body contribute to psychological development and change. For example, we all know how the physical processes of puberty affect adolescence. But that's just one of many examples. Cognitive development focuses on mental processes such as memory, attention span, and intelligence. Social-emotional development includes how we see ourselves, our self-esteem, our self-concept, and how we deal with our emotions. So now that we know what we're studying, how do we study it? Psychologists observe behavior so that they can understand it. Understanding behavior makes it easier to predict and sometimes change behavior. So scientific study must begin with observation. Psychologists use a variety of techniques to study human development. Here are a few highlights before we talk in detail about just a few. Case studies allow researchers to examine one person's experiences in depth. They can learn a lot, but there's no guarantee that one person's experience is the same as someone else's. Experiments involve comparing two groups of people: the experimental group, who's received some kind of special experience or treatment, and the other, the control group, which has not. This is the only way to really tell if something is causing change or just happens to be related in some way. Naturalistic observation is just that, studying people just doing their own thing. We study them in their natural environment. Children on a playground, people at the park, in class, or anywhere under any conditions to which they're naturally exposed. This method lets us watch people without them necessarily knowing it, too. In laboratory observation, psychologists study people under artificial conditions. Sometimes it's necessary to block out other influences during observation, but the downside is that the subject may act differently because they know they're being observed. Psychologists also ask questions. They conduct interviews or survey subjects. Subjects who answer questions use a self-reporting instrument. In some cases, self-reporting is very helpful. Researchers can ask exactly what they want to know. But sometimes answering a researcher's question might be uncomfortable or embarrassing, so getting truthful answers can be a challenge. Does watching people or asking them questions guarantee valid and reliable data on human behavior and its causes? Not necessarily. For one thing, there's a difference between a variable causing a behavior or just being associated with it. This is referred to as correlation versus causation. Sometimes the information is perfectly good, but our conclusions are the problem. Here's an example of faulty conclusions. Did you know that the more firefighters that show up to a fire, the greater property damage there will be? Sounds like we should do away with firefighters, right? Wrong. While it's true that the number of firefighters who show up to a fire is correlated with property damage, that doesn't mean they're causing the damage. The number of firefighters is one variable in this scenario. But you've probably already figured out that the size of the fire is what caused the property damage. The size of the fire is also a variable. The third variable is the amount of property damage. Confounding or intervening variables affect both of the variables under study in ways that were not necessarily considered to start with. In this case, the number of firefighters who will respond to the call and the amount of property damage are both affected by the size of the fire. You will probably see clearer differences between these kinds of variables later in the course. For now, just remember that if two things seem to be connected, it doesn't mean one is causing the other. There's a lot more for you to learn, but for now, just remember that human development is like a recipe. Lots of ingredients come together to make a unique person. Don't assume that different theories have to compete for the right answer. They simply complement each other by explaining things from different perspectives. And finally, all things are not as simple to explain as you might think. Scientific research helps psychologists to narrow down and often pinpoint what variables affect human behavior.